Hi everybody, I'm Steve Gattenby, and today I'm sitting here with Jason Deary, and we are sitting actually in Jason's Toronto studio, and it's really cool to be in here and see kind of the peek behind the curtain because Jason has an upcoming exhibition at Vivian Art in Calgary. So Jason, let's thank you for sitting down with me first of all. Let's talk a little bit about the inspiration for your upcoming show,
Sure.
your process, and kind of where it all began.
Sure. So this is a solo exhibition in Calgary. I've been working on this show for the last year or so. It's a culmination of a number of different ideas and processes. It's a really nice kind of full circle with some projects that I started years ago or things I've been thinking of a long time, and kind of bringing it all together in new ways. It's also really nice to be able to show in Calgary, a city that means a lot to me, for personal and professional reasons, and work in some elements that are a nod to that. So it's been really great.
So you're from Ontario.
Yep.
But you had spent some time in Calgary freshly after you finished up school, right?
Yeah. So I'm, bounced around a little bit as a kid, but I say I'm from Windsor, Ontario. That's where I, kind of spent the better part of my years and the place that I would call home. Following that, I moved to Calgary and then Banff for a little bit. So I spent a little bit of time in Calgary before I got a job at the Banff Centre working there. And then, kind of bounced between the two places as you do when you live there. But yeah, it was at that time that was super crucial, kind of, right after university where, you're kind of trying to figure out who you are and what you want to do and where you want to be. And spending time out there and working at the Banff Centre was super important to me. And I sort of joke that I learned more in that time than I did in school, whether it was undergrad or grad school. Yeah.
So that personal, professional growth period, it's, hits home for you. So that's a special city.
Yep.
Special time in your life, even though you're from Ontario or bounced around Ontario.
Yeah.
Still hold a great deal of adoration to Alberta.
Absolutely. Like I think so much of who I am as an artist, I learned from my time at Banff Centre, whether it was, working in the gallery or going to artist talks or making friends with visiting artists and, having some amazing colleagues. It was just this incredible, period that I'm very fortunate to have.
Yeah. And we see some connections to Calgary.
Yep.
In some of your paintings here.
Yeah. So of course, I'm thinking about my time there, and that kind of informs what I'm doing in more abstract ways, but in more literal ways, I've worked with a number of images in this exhibition. So I have my paintings, and then alongside and integrated into those paintings are some photographed silk-screened images. And one of those is a house that I not frequented because it was boarded up, but that I passed by quite a bit in Calgary. So it was on 12th Avenue Southeast, and you'll see it in yellow painting, and I also have a black and white version of it tucked away. But this house, when I lived there, I'd go for bike rides at night or, runs, and I'd pass by it pretty frequently. And it was this big house that you could tell at once was pretty glorious, but as I knew it, it was, partly kind of burnt up, boarded up, had a big fence around it. And it really kind of stood out as, I think of Calgary being a little more polished, and especially the kind of area that I was living in. It felt really out of place, but it very much reminded me of a lot of the houses that I, would see around in Windsor and Detroit. So at a time when I kind of was figuring out who I was and where I wanted to be and stuff, and frankly a little homesick, it was this place that I was drawn to. I did a drawing of it maybe 10 years ago, and it's kind of lived in my brain since. So having this exhibition in Calgary, it seemed like the perfect time to kind of reintroduce it and play with that image again.
And I think that house would, mean a lot to a lot of Calgarians because unfortunately it burned down a year ago or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was kind of a unofficial landmark house, I think, of the city.
It's this lovely, it's nice working with images like that where some people immediately recognize it. When you get it, you really get it. So it's a place that was special to me, and if I've posted images of things that I've worked on, I've had people respond like, "Oh my God, I remember this place," and it has a relationship to the other images as well. But yeah, it's a place that I've always felt was kind of special and wanted to play with a bit more.
Awesome. So the show coming up, Three-Legged Dog.
Yep.
The inspiration for that comes from a deep and personal experience and story.
Yeah, so the three-legged dog was taken, from a story or an analogy that came about from my stepdad as we were driving cross country. And actually, when I was finishing up my tenure in Banff, I was driving to Toronto to start grad school, and he flew out to do this road trip with me. And about halfway through it, we saw this three-legged dog, and him and I are both very much dog people. And he talked about how the dog was strong and resilient, and how it kind of overcame this loss. And as like viewers or people, like we see this dog and we feel bad for it. And we think, oh my God, this poor dog, like it's lost this thing. And he said that, we don't need to worry about it because the dog doesn't know anything's wrong with it. The dog kind of quickly adapts, and it doesn't know the difference anymore. And, it was a lovely sentiment, and something, that was like a really nice way of looking at things and putting a positive spin on it. But, shortly after, my parents revealed to me that he had diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's in his late 40s. And I think he had a really hard time coming out and telling me about that. And I think, it's impossible for me to fully confirm that at this point. But the way I see it, that was very much his sort of like introduction to be like, you don't have to worry because I'm, soon enough not going to know the difference. Mm-hmm. And, thinking about my family's relationship to dogs in that particular story, I've had this idea of working with a three-legged dog for a really long time. So I brought it into this exhibition kind of front and center. It felt like the perfect title for the show. It's kind of odd and peculiar and slightly funny, but also a very direct and personal nod to that. And the dog itself very much relates to, loss and recovery and presence and absence and resilience and perseverance. And all those themes kind of run through the show.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, also there's a window down here you mentioned too,
yep.
that you took the week your dad passed.
Yep.
For your mom's house too. So
yep.
another nod to family.
Yep.
Worked into the show.
Yeah. So the window relates to the house as being a component of the house, and all these ties. But the windows run through the show thematically, whether it's a very literal photograph of one or these sort of geometric compositions that come together to look like windows and gates, doors, fences, all those kind of things.
And there's a unique significance that you have to windows and gates and doors and such. Mm-hmm. About the passage and not portals, but
portals is fair, yeah,
okay,
yeah,
portals.
For sure.
So
yeah.
Working through to something beyond.
Yeah, I think of them. They're places of like passage and transition. They're places of reflection. People talk about. I think they see these works and they often talk about stained glass, right? And if you think of stained glass, you think about churches, and I think that deals with reflection. And although I'm not a religious person, I'm not upset with that analogy if that's how people read them. Stained glass are beautiful, and they're, so there's the idea of reflection. And then alongside the passage, there's also protection, right? The windows, a gate, a fence, it guards, it holds something in. It lets some things through, but keeps other things out. And, if I'm thinking about memory, having something that protects and holds, but also allows some passage back and forth seems appropriate.
So on the topic of memory there, a quote you had, which I just think is great, mm-hmm. is how we hold on to, reveal, and record memories of the past in order to understand the present and imagine the future.
Yeah.
I think that's that pretty much says it all.
Yeah. I'm very happy I said that. It is very succinct and does relate really well to how I feel about the work. I've always had this sort of interest in history in my paintings. And I think when I was in school and academia, it was much more interest in the history of painting, and very much looking inward at painting and talking about the history of abstraction and all these kind of things, which are very lovely, but I think kind of runs its course. And as these things happen in my personal life, the diagnosis of my stepdad, my interest in history, I think, shifted to an interest in memory. And, so much more or less interested in, what was so-and-so painter up to in the 60s, and more in like, how can we like hold on to things, and how do we record things, and how do we find ways to hold on to the things that matter. And you know, so much of who we are is informed by what we've done. So I think that idea of like recording moments and figuring out, you know, how to hold on to things informs our future.
Oh, well said. And it's fascinating for me to be here behind the scenes because I've been in Vivian's gallery. I've seen everything polished and finished and hung on the white walls looking amazing. But being here and talking to you about your process has been super, super cool. So can you run through again with me just where you begin from the acrylics to the silk screening and kind of from start to finish?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny, like it's hectic in here and there's a lot happening, and this is like the cleanest and tidiest it's been in months. Because I'm very much, my way of working overall is very much about like make, and then kind of sort through the pieces, edit, and build things. So there's a couple things happening in these paintings, one of which is collage, and the other is silkscreen. And they're sort of separate processes, but they end up coming together. So I'll sort of tackle them separately and then I'll work them together. So the silkscreens, that's maybe the shorter answer. So I've made works for a long time that were black and white, and they reference the image and they reference the photographic. They look like black and white photos, or this is literally a black and white photo, but you know, some of these pieces look like black and white photos. So in making paintings that looked like photos, I thought, well, why don't I introduce actual photos and then paint on top of them, and there'll be kind of this play between the two. So I've been collecting some images over the years that I, you know, kind of tucked in my back pocket of, I always wanted to do something with these, but I didn't really know what, I didn't know how, and frankly didn't totally know why. You know, I knew why I was drawn to the dog, but was that enough, you know? But after sitting on them for so long, I was like, nope, I'm gonna do them. So those are all silk screened right onto linen, the same way you'd apply paint to a canvas. So it's an acrylic based ink, so it very much feels just like another method of laying paint down on a surface. So I have 5 images for this show, and sometimes they appear in whole, incomplete, and solid, uninterrupted images. And then sometimes they get broken up into little fractions and fragments, and they get obstructed. So there's a couple things happening there. And the way that they get broken up into fractures and fragments and things like that speaks a little bit more to the collage painting process I use. So generally speaking, the way that I approach painting is maybe slightly unconventional in that rarely do I, you know, apply brush to canvas. There's moments of that maybe at the very start just to lay down a color, or at the very end to just kind of cap it off with one little piece or one little shape. But for the most part, what I'm doing is I'm applying paint to different surfaces and then removing it and applying it to these surfaces after. So when I'm doing that process, it's kind of done in 2 stages. And the first stage of that is just making. So I amass an absolutely ridiculous collection of bits of paint. And then once I have those, I organize them, I sort through them, I start cutting them out, and then I'm assembling them onto the canvas.
So that there's the like experimental kind of the acrylic skin creation. Yeah.
So those acrylic skins are what you see. For the most part, all of the forms and bits that are on these are like skins that I've made on something else, peeled off, and then stuck on. And I'm using acrylic medium to stick them down. So for me, it's really important that it's all just paint on paint on paint on paint. There's kind of an unconventional process to get there, but it's still a painting. So the acrylic skins are primarily made by applying acrylic paint to plastic sheeting. Most of the plastic I get from my day job, it's like the refuse that like our glass comes packaged in. So it's also a bit of a way to like recycle or give something a little bit more of a life before it heads to the dumpster. So I take this plastic sheeting, and it's, you know, it's thicker, like it's almost kind of tarp-like, and you can manipulate it. So I'll fold it, I'll bend it, I'll form a pattern into it, I'll wrap it around an object, and then I'll paint it. Primarily painting in white acrylic paint, and then working an airbrush into it. And the airbrush sort of records the folds, the shadows, the light in a really interesting way. And then after that, I peel it off and I apply it to the canvas. But like I said, it's really, you know, I might make 100 of those skins to find the 10 that really work. So it's really about exploring and experimenting, and, you know, playing with texture and form and all that kind of stuff to just figure out what works, and then building these compositions that come into looking like, you know, these gates that are all divided into triangles and rectangles and circles, and having all these little moments. I combine the two processes as well, where I've silk screened over top of some of these skins too, so that it kind of brings them all together a little bit more. You know, don't want the photos and the silk screens to feel too far apart, so I found ways to integrate them as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, you know, it was nice to have these ideas and be able to kind of bring them together.
And a lot of different sizes.
Yep.
And do you find that there is some method to the madness of picking a size for each one of these pieces?
Yeah, so, you know, there's a few things at play there. I think painters are often drawn to like certain sizes. Like I know people that like things more rectangular and some people like things more square. So I have dimensions that I sort of like, and there's a few 60 by 48s in the show and then a few 30 by 24s. So those are the exact same aspect ratios, and it's just a sort of size of proportion that feels right to me. As I've made this work, the bigger stuff starts to feel more right. When I'm doing the big sort of gates or windows or doorways, I like the idea of it being, you know, the size of a big window in your home, or a door that looks like you can walk through. Like there's a 72-inch tall painting, which is about how tall I am, and you know, I like that idea of it being the size of me, something I could theoretically walk into.
Right.
So, you know, I wanted to have those bigger pieces that felt like they kind of took up your vision or that you could walk into. The smaller ones, same sort of proportion. I feel like it does the same sort of ideas of, you know, windows, but wanted some smaller stuff, and a number of smaller works that I could really play with. You know, doing the bigger pieces are a little more of an undertaking. So doing things at this scale, it's a little less commitment, and, you know, I can try a dozen different things and make, you know, a bunch of different work, because again, experimentation is really important to me, and I also want to have variety in the show as well.
Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to walk me through your process, and it's just been great to be here and see behind the scenes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jason's work will be on display at Vivian Art from March 20th to May 2nd.